How do brands in India Inc. handle turmoil and transitions when it is all the talk right now in the industry? One woman tasked with modernizing and recapturing market share of one of India's oldest distillers spoke to me about what it takes to turn businesses around. I caught up with JagatjitInd Industries. Listen. Roshni, thank you very much for speaking with us here in the Leaders of Tomorrow. Let me start by asking you, what have been some of the biggest changes that your industry has seen over, say, the last decade, and what, in your opinion, is going to be the biggest disruptor going forward?
Thank you so much for having me here, Sunanda. Our industry has gone through major changes in the last 10 years. I think one of the bigger changes would be perhaps the distribution channel in itself having changed. However, in some ways, we are an industry that is completely regulated by government. Those things haven't changed very much. The biggest disruptors in our industry that will perhaps come in the future, in the next decade, I think would be vis-a-vis automation and on the factory floor. I think robotics is huge, and that will have a huge impact on the industry floor at some level. I also think brick and mortar is the way we trade today. Just gauging from FMCG, from retail and every other level, if you look at that, people today are going to brick and mortar less and less. We today buy all our liquor out of liquor stores. I think that disruption has to happen at some point in the next couple of years.
Let's talk about government regulation for your industry, Roshni. This is, of course, one of the more highly regulated industries as far as India is concerned. Can you give us a sense, really, of what sort of changes you'd possibly like to see in India?
Okay, it's awfully regulated, actually. Every step of the way we are regulated. I think the changes that one would like to see is to be treated the same as every other industry in India, which is to at least be able to have the ability to determine your own price. To have free pricing, which we don't have. The government controls our price at every level. So I think that would be one of the big things that we would look to see change. The other thing that would be also nice is that because we are regulated so much, and somewhere along we seem to also sort of end up being sort of vote bank politics, this whole sort of policing of, states, prohibition, non-prohibition, we can't survive without revenue, so we go back to status quo. It would be nice if we were just left alone, just the way every other industry has been. The government is free to tax us, to excise us, but, let us also function business just the way everybody else does.
That's an interesting viewpoint, Roshni. Maybe I can ask you at this point to pick one or two of the things that happen in the global alcoholic beverages industry and ask you to compare how possibly we could have some of those rules or some of those regulations here in India as well, and what changes it could possibly bring for the domestic market.
Well, globally, pricing is freely determined. Second, I guess this is the more obvious one where the governments abroad allow for advertising in a responsible way. India, you don't have advertising allowed in liquor, so you're always using surrogates. So this would be some of the things that, one could perhaps sort of borrow from global industry.
What are the rules and regulations that exist right now as far as restructuring of companies go, Roshni? Maybe you can break it down for our viewers in terms of, the one or two top things that they need to keep in mind if they're looking at restructuring of their own companies, and also whether these rules and regulations are different as far as the alcoholic beverages industry is concerned from the rest of the industry?
So ours is not a restructure in the sense that banks have restructured. This is an internal restructure. So there are no rules and regulations that we are per se following, because it is what we are doing is we are making ourselves more productive, more efficient, and it has been taking on better teams to work internally, and on an external basis we've done rebranding. So in this ambit, government rules and regulations means we are a regulated industry, so we follow the rules. But vis-a-vis the restructure, nothing specific, at least for what I am doing over here.
Okay, let me take a quick step back and talk to you about what your own journey has been like at your company from the time you've started. You said you have a very interesting role in terms of being the Chief Restructuring Officer, but some of the highlights, maybe one or two of the highlights that you can talk about to our viewers?
So when I began, for instance, I began initially, as I said, by running these audits to figure out what was wrong. Post that, I think the important part of my restructure, one of my biggest parts of my restructure actually has been building a team. Without a team, there is no way we could move forward. I don't think it's possible for any individual to do the job of turning a company around. It is in effect the team. So it is actually creating the team. But when you start building the team, it's important. You need to make sure that your old and your new team are able to work together and are able to blend together properly to be able to give you, the desired result. The other thing is that when you're actually also sort of hiring new team, you need to be really careful because for me, for instance, I stepped into a certain culture. One of my biggest challenges has been to try to shift that culture. So I also started hiring people based on a new culture. So this was one big aspect of my restructure. The other aspect of my restructure was I started bringing in technology wherever I could bring in technology. Technology for me, is the way forward. It is the future, but it also brings a lot of transparency in processes. It also brings controls. So technology was my other big step that I actually took. These were some of the internal restructuring efforts that we conducted. On an external basis, we started restructuring and sort of rebranding our brands. The three brands that we actually rebranded was Ice Vodka. We took on a new brand ambassador, Kalki, to represent Ice. The whole campaign for Ice, which launched in January, was quite a different campaign, but it was, Ice was positioned as this brand which was sort of reflecting, allowing you to be who you are, was the message that we were trying to sort of send out with Ice. And Kalki really fitted that position, Be true to yourself, be who you are. She's also the girl next door. So we did a very sort of provocative campaign. For our other brand, which is one of our iconic brands, we also did a rebranding, which was Aristocrat Premium Whiskey. So the restructure took place on an internal basis and on an external basis. Of course, we continue. We are nowhere next to where we need to be at the moment, but we've seen a lot of progress and change.
I want to pick up on what you were just mentioning in terms of restructuring of a brand, Roshni. But I want to take a macro view and ask you to talk to our viewers about what they should keep in mind if they're looking at changing their brand or if they're looking at even developing a stronger brand recall. How do you go about identifying your target group? How do you communicate effectively to that target group? What all should our viewers keep in mind, particularly if they don't necessarily have the funds to be able to hire an external agency or a brand ambassador like yourself?
One of the very important reasons we hire brand ambassadors, I think, is to also sort of, because we are also part of the liquor trade and we don't have much visibility. So whatever little visibility we have, we need people to pay attention and see what we are actually showing them. And brand ambassadors aid in that. This doesn't mean that you can do something. You can also have ad campaigns without brand ambassadors, and that's also a huge trend. And I completely believe in that. But the way to, I think, identify is to figure out what your market is. When you are rebranding, you do not want to disrupt or take away your current consumer base. So you need to figure out a good blend between who your current consumer is and who is the new consumer you want to attract. And you need to find a sort of a median space in the message that you are actually putting forward to this particular consumer.